Two sheriff's cruisers rolled sideways across Marina Road at sunrise, blocking the boat trailers before they reached the launch. Behind them, Rebecca Whitmore's HOA security carts swarmed the entrance like they owned it, while residents leaned on horns and shouted through open windows. The road under those tires was mine. It cut through my 8,400 acres, crossed my gate corridor, and controlled the only paved access to Harbor Point's $5 million marina. Diesel smoke drifted over the lake. Boat chains clinked in the cold air. Then a deputy stepped out and touched the deed folder in my hand. That was the moment Rebecca realized she had built her whole weekend empire on the wrong strip of land. The first trailer tried to pull around the cruiser. A deputy raised one hand. The truck stopped. Its brake lights glowed red against the dust. Nobody moved for a second. The lake behind the marina looked calm, almost too calm, with morning fog curling over the docks and white boats, sitting in neat rows like nothing was happening. But the entrance was locked in place. The whole marina depended on that road. Every fuel delivery, every maintenance truck, every resident hauling a boat to the ramp had to pass the same narrow stretch of asphalt. And that stretch ran across my deed. Rebecca came fast across the gravel in white slacks and a navy blazer, phone pressed to her ear, sunglasses low on her nose. She looked at the deputies first. Then she looked at me. Her smile flickered and died. "This is private HOA access," she said. Her voice was sharp enough to cut through the idling engines. I did not raise my voice. I just held the folder against my side and watched the wind lift dust around her shoes. "My name is Jack Mercer. I am 46 years old, and I spent most of my adult life designing rural access roads, drainage crossings, and utility corridors for counties that never had enough money to fix them twice. I know what a road looks like when it is legal. I know what one looks like when people only assume it is." Harbor Point Marina Estates sat along the eastern edge of the lake, all stone columns, black iron gates, and manicured lawns that stopped just before my boundary line. I had bought the land outside their HOA 6 weeks earlier. 8,400 acres of scrub oak, pasture, lake frontage, and old ranch trails. It was supposed to be quiet. Then the marina traffic started before dawn every Saturday. Trucks rattled past my fence. Golf carts zipped along the shoulder. Delivery vans left tire marks near my lower pasture gate. At first, I thought there had to be an easement. There was always supposed to be paperwork. That is what people say when they want you to stop asking questions. Rebecca had told me the same thing the first time we met. "The Marina Road has always served our community," she said, like history could replace ownership. 2 days later, her HOA installed a blue sign near the entrance. Harbor Point Marina Access. Residents only. They bolted it to a post sunk into my soil. That was not careless. That was a claim. Now the deputies were standing in front of it, reading the county verification letter while Rebecca's residents watched from behind their windshields. The air smelled like lake water, exhaust, and money burning quietly in the background. Then Rebecca pointed at the road and said one sentence that changed everything. "We paid $5 million for this access." The deputy looked back down at my deed. Then his radio crackled. Something bigger was coming. The deputy stepped a few feet away from the road and answered the call with one hand resting on his radio. Nobody could hear the voice on the other end. Everyone watched anyway. Engines idled. Boat trailers rattled softly in the breeze. The lake water slapped against the marina docks below. Rebecca stood perfectly still beside the entrance sign. Her phone was still in her hand, but she was no longer talking. That mattered. A woman behind the wheel of a luxury SUV rolled down her window and asked what was happening. Nobody answered her. Then another resident stepped out of his truck and pointed toward me. That was the first time I heard my name moving through the crowd. Jack Mercer. The new owner. The guy holding up the marina. The story was already spreading. The problem was that most of them only knew Rebecca's version. The deputy returned a minute later. His expression had changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. He handed the verification letter back to me and looked toward the road. Do not remove any signs, barriers, or markers, he said. County records personnel are on their way. Several residents heard that. So did Rebecca. Her jaw tightened for half a second. Then she smiled again. It looked forced this time. There must be a mistake, she said. This road has served Harbor Point for years. The deputy did not argue. He simply nodded and walked back toward his cruiser. That silence said more than a debate would have. 20 minutes later, the first county vehicle arrived. A white pickup with survey equipment mounted in the bed rolled slowly through the crowd. The residents moved aside. Conversations dropped to whispers. The smell of hot asphalt drifted up as the sun climbed higher. 2 county employees stepped out carrying folders and measuring tools. One of them walked directly to a steel property marker near the edge of the road. Rebecca noticed it immediately. So did I. The marker sat half-hidden beneath ornamental landscaping installed by the HOA years earlier. Decorative stones surrounded it. Fresh mulch covered part of the base. Somebody had tried very hard to make it disappear without actually removing it. That detail stayed with me. The survey technician brushed away dirt with his boot and exposed the metal cap. Then he checked a set of coordinates. A second technician opened a county map. Residents leaned forward to see. Rebecca crossed her arms. Nobody looked comfortable anymore. The Marina was supposed to be preparing for one of its busiest weekends of the year. Instead, everyone was staring at a boundary marker. Around noon, the crowd started thinning. Some residents left. Others stayed near the docks hoping the road would reopen. Rebecca remained at the entrance. Every few minutes another board member arrived and spoke quietly with her. They kept looking toward me. They kept looking toward the county truck. Then one of the survey technicians walked over carrying a folder thicker than the one in my hands. He stopped beside the deputy and pointed at a specific page. The deputy read it once. Then he read it again. Whatever was in that file had his full attention. Rebecca saw it too. And for the first time all morning, she stopped talking. The technician closed the folder and handed it back to the deputy. Neither man said a word. That silence spread faster than any announcement could have. Residents stopped talking. Even the gulls circling above the marina seemed louder than the crowd. Rebecca took 2 quick steps forward. I would like to see that document, she said. The deputy remained polite. County review is still active. That was all he gave her. Her smile returned, but only partially. One of the board members beside her looked genuinely concerned now. Another pulled out a phone and started making calls. The mood had shifted. People could feel it. They just did not know why. Around 1 o'clock, the county employees finished photographing markers along the shoulder. One of them walked farther down the road toward a weathered fence line that separated the marina entrance from my western pasture. I followed at a distance. Dry grass brushed against my boots. The lake breeze carried the smell of fuel from the docks below. The technician stopped beside an old steel post sticking a few inches above the ground. Most people would never notice it. I almost missed it myself the first week I owned the property. He scraped away dirt with a small hand tool. Another marker appeared beneath the surface. Then another. 3 markers in a straight line. That caught his attention immediately. It caught mine too. He checked coordinates again. The numbers matched something in his folder. Looking back, that mattered. A little later, I drove home and spread my paperwork across the kitchen table. Sunlight poured through the windows overlooking the lake. The house was quiet except for the ticking of an old wall clock. I opened the deed folder again. Then I opened it a second time. The folder had come with the ranch during closing. Thick paper. Old maps. Transfer records. Most buyers would have tossed it onto a shelf and forgotten about it. I almost did. A folded survey from decades earlier slid out from between 2 pages. I flattened it on the table. The paper crackled beneath my hands. One line on that map followed the shoreline. Another followed the road leading to the marina. Then I noticed a handwritten notation in the corner. Not legal language. Not engineering language. Just a simple note from a surveyor long retired. The road corridor remains within parent tract boundary. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. The coffee beside me had gone cold. I did not touch it. Outside, a boat engine started somewhere across the water. That note alone was not enough to settle anything. But it pointed in a direction. The same direction as the county markers. The same direction as the verification letter. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number from Harbor Point. I answered. A woman spoke quietly. "I live in the Marina neighborhood," she said. Her voice sounded nervous. "The board never told us about any ownership dispute." I looked back at the survey on the table. "There is something else you should know," she said. Then she mentioned a meeting that happened before I bought the ranch. The woman hesitated before continuing. I could hear voices in the background. A television. A door closing. Then she lowered her voice even more. "The board discussed the road before the ranch sale was finalized." I leaned against the kitchen counter and looked out toward the lake. The water reflected the afternoon sun like polished metal. "Discussed what exactly?" I asked. There was a pause. "Whether they should buy it." That answer landed harder than I expected. I did not say anything immediately. The old survey remained spread across the table. The handwritten note sat in the corner like it had been waiting decades for someone to read it. "Did they?" I asked. "No," she replied. "The board was told the road was already protected." Then the call ended. I stood there listening to the silence in the house. The refrigerator hummed softly. Somewhere outside, a truck passed on the county highway. That conversation changed the shape of the story. Until then, I had assumed people were operating on bad information. Now there was a possibility that someone had seen the risk years earlier and chosen to ignore it. The next morning I drove into town. A low layer of fog still hung over the lake. The marina entrance remained blocked. Residents were already posting photos online. Every gas station and coffee shop seemed to be talking about it. Harbor Point had become local news overnight. At the county records building, I requested historical filings tied to the Marina property. The clerk disappeared into the archive room. Dusty boxes lined the shelves behind her. The building smelled like paper and floor wax. 20 minutes later she returned with 3 binders. One of them looked older than the others. The cover was faded and worn at the corners. That was the one I opened first. Transfer documents. Easement reviews. Infrastructure applications. I worked through them page by page. Most were routine. Then I found meeting minutes from years earlier. My eyes stopped on a single paragraph. Harbor Point Board recommends further review of roadway ownership prior to marina expansion approval. I read the sentence twice. Then again. The recommendation was there in plain English. Somebody had raised the issue. Somebody had documented the concern. Yet the marina expansion still moved forward. $5 million had eventually been spent. Boat slips were built. Access improvements were completed. Residents paid assessments. The road remained exactly where it always had been. Another detail caught my attention. The meeting minutes listed attendees. Rebecca Whitmore's name appeared near the top. Looking back, that mattered. I copied every page. By late afternoon I returned to the ranch. The wind had picked up. Waves rolled against the shoreline below the bluff. The marina sat quiet across the water. Several boats remained docked. None were leaving. None were arriving. The blocked entrance was doing exactly what entrances are designed to do. A county SUV was parked near the gate when I arrived. One of the survey technicians stepped out holding a clipboard. He looked tired. He also looked certain. "We found something else," he said. Then he handed me a newly printed aerial map. A red line ran straight through the center of the marina access corridor. Rebecca was not going to like what it showed. The survey technician unfolded the aerial map across the hood of my truck. The paper snapped in the wind. Late afternoon sunlight reflected off the lake behind us. Waves rolled steadily against the shoreline below the bluff. The technician placed one finger on the red line running through the access corridor. "This boundary matches every county record we have," he said. His voice was calm, professional, certain. I studied the map. The line cut directly across the paved entrance used by every resident, contractor, fuel truck, and Marina customer. Looking at it from above made the situation impossible to ignore. The road was not near the property line. It was crossing it. That difference mattered. A lot. The technician handed me a second document. This one was newer. Recently generated. Full color. Satellite imagery overlaid with surveyed coordinates. The red line appeared again. Same location. Same result. He packed up his folder a few minutes later and drove away. Dust followed the county SUV down the gravel road. I remained beside the truck for a while. The Marina sat quiet across the water. Boat masts rocked gently in the breeze. Nothing about the scene suggested a major conflict. Yet almost every important document now pointed in the same direction. The next morning I received an email from a local reporter. Harbor Point had become the most discussed topic in the county. Residents were posting photos. Rumors were spreading. Some people blamed me. Others blamed the HOA board. The reporter wanted a statement. I declined. Public arguments rarely solve property disputes. Paperwork does. Around noon, another development arrived. A certified letter. This time from attorneys representing the HOA. The envelope was thick. Expensive. Formal. I opened it at the kitchen table. Sunlight stretched across the floorboards. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room. Inside were several pages demanding immediate restoration of Marina access. They accused me of interfering with community operations and damaging property values. I read every page carefully. Then I noticed something buried near the end. The attorneys referenced ownership claims that depended on records I already knew were under review. That detail caught my attention immediately. They were building arguments on ground that was becoming less stable by the day. Looking back, that mattered. I placed the letter beside the old meeting minutes from the county archive. One document showed warnings from years ago. The other showed confidence today. The contrast was difficult to ignore. Later that afternoon, Mason Harper called. Mason owned a marine repair business near the lake. He worked with residents from Harbor Point all the time. "You seeing what is happening over there?" he asked. I stepped onto the porch. Wind moved through the oak trees. "What now?" "Board meeting tonight." His tone carried weight. "Special meeting." I looked toward the marina. Several vehicles were already gathering near the clubhouse. "What are they telling people?" There was a pause. "That the county is wrong." I said nothing. Mason exhaled slowly. "And that they can prove it." The line went quiet for a moment. Then he added one more thing. "Rebecca says she has documents nobody else has seen." I stared across the lake at the clubhouse lights beginning to appear in the distance. If those documents existed, they were about to become very important. That evening the lights around the Harbor Point clubhouse reflected across the lake like a second shoreline. I could see them from my porch. Cars continued arriving long after sunset. Board members. Residents. Attorneys. The special meeting was drawing a crowd. Wind moved through the trees behind the house. A distant boat bell clinked somewhere near the marina docks. I stayed home. There was no reason for me to attend. If Rebecca truly had documents that changed everything, they would surface soon enough. Around 9 o'clock my phone started buzzing. First one message. Then 3 more. Then a call. It was the same homeowner who had contacted me earlier. Her voice sounded different now. Less nervous. More confused. She showed everyone a map, the woman said. I walked to the kitchen table and grabbed a notebook. "What kind of map?" "An old marina development map." I waited. Did it show ownership? Another pause. No. That answer came quickly. Too quickly. The woman continued. Rebecca had projected several documents onto a screen. Construction plans, utility routes, marina expansion sketches, old engineering drawings. Residents applauded each time a new image appeared. The presentation looked impressive, professional, convincing. There was only one problem. None of those documents actually proved ownership of the access corridor. The woman eventually admitted something else. Several residents had started asking questions during the meeting. Questions about the county survey. Questions about the historical records. Questions about why earlier board minutes referenced ownership concerns. Rebecca apparently dismissed those concerns and moved on. Looking back, that mattered. The next morning, another certified envelope arrived. This one was not from attorneys. It came directly from the Harbor Point Board. I opened it beside the same kitchen window where the lake filled half the view. The letter accused county personnel of relying on incomplete information. It requested immediate cooperation. It encouraged me to support a private review process. The language sounded confident. Yet something felt different. The certainty from earlier letters was gone. This document sounded defensive. That shift was subtle. But it was real. Around noon, Mason called again. "You need to see this," he said. 20 minutes later, I met him near his repair shop by the lake. The parking lot smelled like fuel, lake water, and fresh-cut lumber. Mason handed me a printed copy of a community newsletter distributed after the board meeting. Rebecca's photograph appeared on the front page. Beneath it sat a headline promising a rapid resolution. I skimmed the article. Most of it repeated familiar claims. Then I noticed a sentence near the bottom. The board expects confirmation from archived property records currently being reviewed. I stopped reading. Mason noticed immediately. "You saw it too." I nodded. The phrase changed everything. Up until now, Rebecca had spoken as if ownership was already settled. Now she was waiting for records. That meant she did not have them. Or worse, she had looked for them and failed to find them. The distinction was important. We stood there in silence for a moment, while trucks passed on the highway nearby. Then my phone vibrated. An email notification appeared on the screen. The sender was the county archive office. The subject line contained only 6 words. Additional historical documents located this morning. I opened the email before I even got back into my truck. The county archive office had attached 6 scanned documents. The files were old. Some pages were faded. Others carried handwritten notes in blue ink. I drove straight home and spread everything across the kitchen table. Afternoon sunlight filled the room. The lake shimmered beyond the windows. The first few pages were routine transfer records. Then I reached a memorandum dated decades earlier. My eyes stopped on a single paragraph. The Marina developers had requested clarification regarding access rights before construction began. That alone was interesting. The next page was even better. A county reviewer had recommended that ownership of the corridor be formally resolved before major investments were approved. I leaned back in my chair. The old wall clock ticked softly behind me. This was not a new concern. People had been asking the same question for years. Somebody simply chose not to answer it. I kept reading. The documents formed a timeline. Meetings. Reviews. Recommendations. Delays. One detail appeared again and again. Access verification pending. The phrase showed up so many times it practically jumped off the page. Looking back, that mattered. Around sunset, my phone rang. The caller identified himself as a former Harbor Point board member. He no longer lived in the community. His voice sounded calm, almost relieved. "I heard what is happening," he said. "I wondered when someone would finally look at those records." I walked onto the porch while we talked. Wind moved across the lake. The marina lights were beginning to appear in the distance. "What records?" I asked. There was a pause. "The board received warnings years ago." I remained silent. "Some people wanted to investigate further. Others believed the issue would disappear." The Conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. He described discussions that sounded remarkably similar to the meeting minutes I had already found. Ownership concerns had surfaced repeatedly. Expansion plans kept moving forward anyway. Revenue increased. Property values increased. Assessments increased. Nobody wanted to interrupt momentum. That pattern felt familiar. Before ending the call, he mentioned one final detail. A legal review had once been commissioned but never completed. That caught my attention immediately. "Do you know why?" I asked. "Because nobody liked the preliminary findings." Then he hung up. The next morning, county officials requested another site visit. Survey crews returned to the corridor. Residents gathered again near the blocked entrance. The atmosphere felt different now. Less confident. More cautious. People asked questions openly. Some homeowners wanted answers from Rebecca. Others wanted answers from the county. The road had become more than an inconvenience. It had become a symbol of uncertainty. Around noon, I spotted Rebecca speaking with two attorneys near the Marina gate. She looked composed from a distance. But she kept checking her phone. Kept glancing toward the survey crews. Kept watching every county vehicle that arrived. That was new. Then one of the officials stepped out carrying a large document tube. He handed it directly to the lead surveyor. The surveyor unrolled the contents across the hood of a county truck. Even from where I stood, I could tell it was not an ordinary map. Several people moved closer. Rebecca did too. Then the surveyor pointed to something near the bottom corner, and the entire conversation around the entrance suddenly stopped. The surveyor kept his finger on the lower corner of the map while the crowd gathered closer around the county truck. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Wind pushed across the lake. The Marina flag snapped sharply above the docks. Even from where I stood, I could see the age of the document. The paper had yellowed at the edges. Fold lines crossed the surface. It looked older than most of the homes in Harbor Point. The surveyor turned the map slightly and pointed again. This time. Several county officials leaned forward. One of them immediately asked for another file. That caught my attention. Rebecca stepped closer. So did her attorneys. Whatever sat on that map was important enough to stop every conversation at the entrance. A few minutes later, the lead county official requested a folding table. The map was moved onto it. Additional documents appeared beside it. Survey reports. Archive records. Property transfers. The officials began comparing them one by one. Looking back, that mattered. The crowd grew larger as words spread through the marina. Residents walked up from the docks. Golf carts arrived from nearby streets. People who had spent the morning frustrated about boat access now seemed more interested in the paperwork than the road itself. Questions floated through the crowd. Nobody had answers yet. Around midday, one of the county officials approached me. He carried a photocopy of the same historical map. "Have you seen this before?" he asked. I shook my head. He handed it over. My eyes moved across shoreline markings, parcel references, and survey notations. Then I saw it. Near the bottom sat a recorded corridor designation tied directly to the parent ranch tract. Not the marina. Not the subdivision. The parent tract. My tract. A second notation referenced a future transfer that apparently never occurred. The language was simple. Conditional upon recorded conveyance. I read the line twice. Then a third time. The conveyance was nowhere in the archived documents I had collected. That was not proof by itself. But it created a very important question. If the transfer never happened, what exactly had everyone been relying on all these years? By early afternoon, the atmosphere had changed again. Several homeowners were openly questioning board members. One resident held a copy of the community newsletter and pointed toward the county table. Another asked why ownership concerns had appeared in historical meeting records. Rebecca continued speaking with attorneys near the entrance, but her confidence seemed strained now. She kept checking new documents as they arrived. Kept making calls. Kept looking toward the surveyors. The certainty. from earlier weeks was disappearing. Then another county vehicle arrived. This one carried archive staff from a neighboring records facility. That surprised everyone. Additional boxes were unloaded and carried directly to the folding tables. The lead official signed several forms before opening them. More historical files. More records. More history. The crowd fell quiet again. One archive employee carefully removed a thin binder and handed it to the surveyor. He opened it immediately. His eyes narrowed. Then he turned several pages in rapid succession. The attorney standing beside Rebecca noticed the reaction first. So did I. The surveyor stopped on a single page and called the lead official over. Whatever they were looking at had not been part of the original review. The lead official studied the page for nearly a full minute before looking up. Nobody interrupted him. The marina entrance had become completely silent except for wind moving across the water and the distant creak of dock lines against metal cleats. The surveyor remained beside the table. Rebecca stood several feet away with her attorneys. Every eye was fixed on the binder. Then the official spoke. The document was a recorded review summary prepared decades earlier. It referenced the same corridor, the same access route, the same unresolved transfer that appeared in multiple county records. More importantly, it confirmed that ownership verification had never been completed. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Residents looked at one another. Attorneys flipped through papers. Rebecca immediately stepped forward and requested copies. The official agreed. Nobody argued. There was nothing left to argue about. The records were speaking for themselves. Over the next several days, county staff completed the final review. Additional archives were checked. Historical surveys were compared. Property transfers were traced back through multiple ownership changes. Every path led to the same conclusion. The corridor remained tied to the parent ranch tract. The transfer everyone assumed had happened could not be located because it had never been recorded. Looking back, that was the missing piece. The entire conflict had survived on assumptions. Assumptions became habits. Habits became policies. Policies became expensive infrastructure. None of that changed the records. A week later, the county issued its findings. The marina remained open. The docks remained open. The homes remained exactly where they had always been. But the access corridor was no longer being treated as HOA property. Deputies returned to supervise the updated access restrictions while county officials completed the administrative process. This time there were fewer angry conversations. Most residents simply wanted clarity. Many had spent years paying fees without ever knowing the ownership question existed. Rebecca attended the final public meeting. She looked tired. The confidence that once filled every room was gone. Several homeowners asked difficult questions. Others asked why earlier warnings had never been fully investigated. The answers were short. The silence afterward was longer. By the end of the meeting, the board announced leadership changes and a review of prior decisions. The story that began with a blocked road had become something much larger. Months later, the lake looked the same as it always had. Morning fog still drifted across the water. Boats still rocked gently in their slips. Wind still moved through the trees above the shoreline. I replaced old boundary markers and repaired sections of fence damaged by years of traffic. The county records were updated. The surveys were finalized. The paperwork was finally aligned with reality. One evening I drove down the corridor just before sunset. Golden light stretched across the pavement. The water reflected orange and silver beneath the sky. Near the entrance stood a simple sign acknowledging the access arrangement now in place. Nothing flashy. Nothing dramatic. Just clear boundaries supported by clear records. I sat there for a moment listening to the lake and watching the last light fade from the marina. In the end, the road never changed. Only the truth around it did.